welcome to ECCB Connects. Next Thursday, 7 July, will mark 40 years since the EC dollar has been pegged to the US dollar at a rate of 2.7 EC dollars to 1 US dollar. To explain what this means for you, the people of the ECCU, we have Deputy Director in the Research Department, Mr. Hamilton Stephen. Hamilton, welcome to ECCB Connects.
Thank you, Shemalan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hamilton, since 1976, the EC dollar has been pegged to the US dollar. When we say peg, what exactly do we mean here?
What does it mean when we say that the exchange rate is pegged or the EC dollar is pegged to the US? Well, in terms of exchange rate regimes, different arrangements for managing the exchange rate, we have different arrangements. In some cases, the exchange rate changes, sometimes frequently, sometimes daily. In other cases, at predetermined intervals by the central bank or whatever the case may be. And then there is the case that is similar to ours, where that exchange rate remains fixed. It is unchanging unless and until some decision is taken to change that peg by the central bank or the government of the day, whatever the case may be. But basically, what it means is that it's fixed, it's unchanging, it's predictable. You go to the bank today, it's going to be 2.71. You go to the bank tomorrow, it's going to be 2.71. You go to the bank a year from now. You went to the bank 40 years ago, and it was 2.71. So that is fixed. That's like your guarantee. Okay. When you say you can bank on it, you can bank on the exchange rate, right? It's 2.7. So it's fixed and predictable. That's basically what it means.
Before that fixed regime, though, there was another regime where the EC dollar was pegged to the pound sterling.
Yes, there was. And that was under a different arrangement, really. Our economic management in the region really evolved along with the political arrangements. And I'm speaking of what obtained from colonial times to the Federation times to independence and now the post-independence era. And actually, the EC dollar was always pegged. Okay, those of us who are old enough to remember, I'm not one of those because it goes back to the 60s, the 50s in terms of the British West Indian dollar. And that arrangement included other members of the Caribbean British Empire, which included Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica at some point, Barbados, so that as the arrangements evolved, as different countries became independent and went on to pursue their own institutions, establish their own institutions of economic management, the membership changed. And eventually, in 1976, we pegged to the US dollar at 2.71. Prior to that, we were pegged to the British pound. Really, I think it was about 4.5, 4.58, somewhere in that region, and that was along with the other members like Barbados and Trinidad. It was really when Barbados broke off, and I think it was 64, 65. Somewhere around there, that we became the BCCB, okay, and eventually the ECCA, and in 1983, eventually the ECCB was established. But we were always pegged. It's just that we were pegged to the pound initially, and then eventually the peg was switched over at the existing exchange rate between the pound and the US to the US dollar at 2.7.
What were some of the factors that would have influenced the change from being pegged to the pound to the US dollar?
It was the evolution of the political arrangements and the emergence of trading partners. And our case evolved in a manner where we were getting most of our imports from the US even back then, but our exports, of course, were going to Britain. So in an attempt, I can only assume, to stabilize prices, ensure that you don't have too much fluctuation in terms of our import prices, because we were importing so much as we do now. so that we pegged to the US because of the changing global dynamics and all of that, with the US emerging as a major trading partner for most of us. It made sense then to peg to the US dollar.
What does this peg then mean for the people of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union?
Value is important. Stability is critical for economic advancement, for economic growth, to facilitate commerce, to facilitate trade, to facilitate investments. We need some assurances that our investments and our savings will not lose value. So that peg is basically a guarantee to our traders that the export, the revenue that from our exports is fairly predictable. The cost for our imports is fairly predictable. And most of all, those who invest in our region, whether it is financial investments or even fixed investments, it's almost a guarantee that the value of your investment would not be diminished through a loss on your exchange rate. And that is very important for commerce. In fact, in the literature on exchange rates, there's almost a broad agreement now that the level of the exchange rate isn't as important as people used to think it was. And that what matters really is that stability and that predictability. So knowing that a foreign investor wishes to construct a hotel or just purchase some fixed deposits in our system, you need to know that if you put 10 million US dollars in today, you convert that to EC, that something will not happen tomorrow, and then the EC equivalent when converted back to US is now like 5 million US. So if you put in 10 million, you're going to get 27 million EC, and 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, you can convert that 27 million EC back to 10 million US. So that predictability, that stability is almost a guarantee then that you would be protected from those losses, because exchange rate movements have caused much instability around the world. Different countries have gotten into significant difficulties as a result of those movements. But in our case, we've been shielded from that for the last 40 years, as they say, knock on wood. But we haven't had any reason to consider or contemplate changing.
So it's really confidence in the EC dollar.
It is the what underpins that confidence, actually. I mean, 40 years, we're probably the longest standing exchange rate in the world, probably second only to Barbados. But at 40 years, we're probably the longest standing peg in the world, and that's a compliment to our economic management, and it is very good for business.
Okay. You mentioned investors, and now you've said good for business. Let's say you break it down now. What does the peg mean for, let's say, a small businessman, local businessman, or even, let's say, a housewife?
What it does really is in terms of assessing the potential or the cost of interacting with the rest of the world, really. So let's take the case of the housewife who does the groceries and the shopping. A free-floating peg, and one that really changes, without in an unpredictable way.
One rate today, another rate tomorrow.
Yes, or several rates today. It could wreak havoc on the household budget. Okay, for the most part, if we had some experiences in the region back in the 70s, during the oil crisis of the 70s, in Jamaica, we saw some of that. We saw some of the instability in Guyana, where the exchange rates change frequently. I've heard stories and examples of people going to the supermarket and they're being at the cashier's desk. Our ex-governor used to tell that story very often. At the supermarket, at the cashier's cashier area, there is a basket, okay? So that the prices are likely to have changed between the time you took the stuff off the grocery shelves and the time you got to the cashier to cash them.
Short space of time.
That short space of time. There's a fixed amount of money in your pocket. That is not changing. So what you could have afforded 5 minutes ago you can no longer afford now. So that basket is there so that you can dump the stuff that you can no longer afford between the time that you entered the supermarket and the time you got to the cashier. We have no experiences with that type of unpredictability and instability. We have examples of restaurants where the prices were never fixed, like they were not written on the menu. They were written on the board, okay, with chalk. So you sat down to have your dinner and your ordinary chicken lunch cost $25. And while you're eating, you know, somebody's erasing that 25 and putting in 35. You know what I mean?
Has changed.
The rate has changed, okay? And these are real life examples that happen right here in the Caribbean. But we have no such experiences here. So when the global crisis broke out, 07, 08, and, you know, there was all this uncertainty and all this fear, and we actually saw it manifest in other places. It really didn't hit us that badly. I mean, if you spoke to some of the people around, you might get the impression that we were not even fully aware of the types of risks that we were facing at the time. And it was a pretty treacherous time.
What are some of the conditions that are responsible for the maintenance of that, the stability of the rate?
That's a very good question. The stability of the rate really depends on the ability of the monetary authority to defend the rate, to support the rate.
ECCB Monetary Council.
In this case, it's the ECCB and the Monetary Council, because only the Monetary Council can authorize a change in the exchange rate, and that requires a unanimous vote by all 8 members. But what it really boils down to, I mean, the economics of it, is that when the case arises where the market suspects that the central bank would not be able to defend the currency. In other words, if the stated rate is 2.7, the central bank needs to maintain an adequacy of foreign exchange reserves, US dollars, to ensure that the EC dollars that are in circulation can be redeemed for the requisite US dollars, so that it becomes an issue when there is doubt in the minds of the consumers, the bankers, the international community, that the central bank does not have sufficient reserves to support the currency. So that if, let's take an extreme example, if everybody out there who held EC dollars decided, look, I do not want to hold this EC dollar anymore, and I am going to convert all of my holdings into US dollars. The central bank needs to ensure that there is sufficient currency that they can literally repurchase all those EC dollars. When that confidence disappears, then there is pressure on the exchange rate. Speak about speculative attacks, where people engage in activities and currency trades to try to force that, because some people actually bet on those things in markets and can actually win. But fortunately, the backing of the EC dollar is such that that issue has never arisen. So there has never been any reason to doubt the ability of the central bank to defend the currency, although we have heard calls from various sources for devaluation, to consider devaluation. But those have never been justified by the economic fundamentals. You know, our macroeconomic fundamentals have always indicated that the exchange rate is just about right. Okay, so that pressure has never existed in our case.
So 40 years strong, do you see this continuing for another 40 years?
Absolutely, with a backing of 107%, even when the law requires a backing of 60%. I mean, we're very well positioned to defend the currency, and there are no such what we refer to as incipient pressures. And that's just jargon to say we don't see anything happening in the environment that would lead to immediate pressures on the peg. However, there are risks. Because in a case such as ours, in an example such as ours, the pressures can be brought to bear from different angles. Specifically, we can think about any activity that could result in a depletion of the foreign exchange holdings. And in our example, in our case, these tend to revolve around issues in respect of the banking sector, and issues in respect of our governments. Okay, so activities there can in fact bring pressures to bear on the exchange rate. So it is very important that our governments maintain strong and stable fiscal stance, that we keep our debt in proper check. We've had some challenges in the banking sector. The central bank has worked assiduously along with our member governments to rectify those issues where they existed. And to a large extent, we're not totally out of the woods, but we have not seen that cost in terms of the foreign exchange reserves that will rise to that level. We have taken a hit in terms of the bank resolution on our backing, but certainly there has been a recovery. On the side of our governments, we are aware, it has been widely discussed, we are aware that there are some challenges and that on the debt side, there are issues to be resolved. However, again, those have been managed well enough to avoid any adverse consequences for the peg. Certainly, on both fronts, we're not totally out in the clear, and we would always advise, that the efforts to build that resilience and to eliminate some of those sources of risks continue and intensify. But at the moment, I anticipate and expect that this peg will remain intact for the remainder of my natural life, and I hope to live a very long time.
So the EC dollar 40 and
going strong. 40 and going strong. Yeah.
Hamilton, thank you very much for speaking with us on ECCB Connects.
It's been a pleasure, and I certainly hope that this engagement is, meaningful, beneficial, and useful to our audience. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're watching ECCB Connects, protecting our currency, developing our region. And now for this week's financial tip.
Hi, I'm Alice Adams Francois from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Have a financial goal. If you don't know where you're going financially, you may end up somewhere you don't want to be. Whether it's saving for a home, retirement, or a child's education, set specific goals and prioritize.
To view any episode of ECCB Connects, anytime, any place, at your convenience, check out our YouTube channel, ECCB Connects.
This brings us to the end of this week's episode of ECCB Connects. Thank you very much for joining us, and do join us again next week for another exciting program.